heat of the summer of 1900 hung heavy over the streets of Beijing. Dust swirled in the air as thousands of angry young men gathered in the city squares, chanting and waving their fists toward the foreign legations. They called themselves the Righteous and Harmonious Fists, but foreigners, and later history, would know them by another name, the Boxers. To them, China was under siege, not by armies alone, but by ideas, religions, and machines that threatened to erase centuries of tradition. The railroads that cut through the sacred earth, the missionaries who preached a strange new faith, and the foreign soldiers who walked with arrogance on Chinese soil. All of these became symbols of humiliation and invasion. The story of the Boxer Rebellion began not with battle, but with fear, drought, and anger. For decades, China had suffered defeats at the hands of foreign powers. The Opium Wars had shattered its pride, and the unequal treaties that followed turned the once mighty Qing Empire into a shadow of its former self. Foreign merchants controlled ports. Missionaries spread Christianity across villages, and European soldiers garrisoned Chinese cities. The emperor himself seemed powerless to stop the decay, while ordinary people, peasants and workers alike, faced hunger and despair. The northern provinces had been struck by years of famine, and superstition mingled with desperation. People whispered that the gods were angry, that China had lost the mandate of heaven because foreign devils had poisoned the land. From this mix of misery and rage rose the Boxers. They were mostly young men, farmers, laborers, and martial artists, who believed that through ritual and spiritual discipline, they could summon divine power. They practiced in open fields, their bodies moving in unison as they chanted incantations and performed exercises said to make them invulnerable to bullets and blades. They believed ancient spirits and gods would protect them as they drove out the foreigners. It was a strange and frightening sight. Thousands of men covered in talismans, their eyes burning with conviction, moving like an army of ghosts preparing for war. At first, local officials saw the Boxers as troublemakers. But as the movement spread across Shandong and Hebei, even some Qing officers began to sympathize. They too resented the foreign presence, and they saw in the Boxers a force that might restore Chinese pride. In secret, some members of the imperial court, including the powerful Empress Dowager Qixi, began to see them not as a threat, but as potential allies. Qixi was a woman of immense cunning. Long accustomed to the shifting winds of Chinese politics, she had watched foreign powers carve up her empire, and now saw a chance to use the Boxer movement to her advantage. By 1900, the Boxers were no longer a hidden cult. They were a mass uprising. Villages were set ablaze, missionaries killed, and Chinese converts to Christianity hunted down as traitors. The rebellion spread like wildfire, and Beijing soon became its heart. Foreign legations in the city were besieged, their residents trapped behind barricades as Boxer mobs roamed the streets. From inside, diplomats and soldiers could hear the cries of the Boxers echoing through the night. Support the Qing, exterminate the foreigners. The irony was sharp. The Boxers claimed to support the very dynasty that was too weak to control them. Outside the walls of Beijing, the countryside was in chaos. In one province after another, foreign railways were torn up, telegraph lines cut, and missionaries massacred. Reports of atrocities traveled fast, shocking the Western world. Newspapers in London, Paris, and New York printed sensational headlines describing barbarous acts and calling for intervention. To the foreign powers, this was not merely rebellion. It was an assault on civilization itself. The Eight-Nation Alliance was formed in response, a coalition of troops from Britain, France, Germany, Russia, Japan, the United States, Italy, and Austria-Hungary. They gathered their forces at the coast and began marching toward Beijing, determined to rescue their trapped countrymen and punish the Qing court. The march was brutal. The foreign soldiers faced fierce resistance from both Boxers and Qing troops, who had finally joined forces. Villages were burned, and civilians were slaughtered in reprisal. It was not a clean war. It was a storm of vengeance on both sides. Inside the besieged foreign legations, life became a nightmare. Food ran low, ammunition dwindled, and disease spread. Missionaries and diplomats worked alongside soldiers to fortify the walls, while women tended to the wounded and carried water under fire. Every night, the defenders heard the Boxers chanting outside. Their rhythmic drums and gongs meant to summon spirits and strike fear. The attackers believed the gods fought beside them, but the bullets of the modern age were merciless. Despite their bravery and faith, the Boxers fell in droves against rifles and machine guns. Meanwhile, Empress Dowager Cixi faced an impossible choice. Some of her advisors urged her to crush the Boxers and appease the foreign powers, while others demanded that she stand with the rebellion and declare war on the West. Her pride and anger won out. In June 1900, she declared war on all foreign nations in China, officially aligning the Qing Empire with the Boxers. The decision sealed her fate and that of the dynasty. The Eight-Nation Alliance advanced relentlessly. By August, they reached the gates of Beijing. The city fell after days of fierce fighting. Foreign troops poured into the capital, looting palaces and temples, killing indiscriminately. The streets that had once echoed with the defiant cries of the Boxers now ran red with blood. The imperial court fled to Xi'an, leaving behind the ruins of their capital. The rebellion was broken. For the Boxers, defeat was devastating. Their faith in their invulnerability shattered along with their bodies. Thousands were executed or hunted down in the months that followed. Foreign soldiers, seeking revenge for the siege, carried out brutal reprisals. Entire villages suspected of supporting the Boxers were burned to the ground. It was a dark period, one that left deep scars across northern China. When the war finally ended, the victors imposed harsh terms. The Boxer Protocol of 1901 forced China to pay enormous reparations to the foreign powers, a staggering sum that would cripple the nation for decades. Foreign troops occupied parts of Beijing, and the Qing court was humiliated once again. Empress Dowager Cixi, who had once dreamed of expelling the foreigners, now had to bow to them. She issued edicts condemning the Boxers and promising to reform the empire. But the damage was already done. And yet, even in defeat, the spirit of the Boxers did not entirely vanish. For all their superstition and cruelty, they had fought for something real: the right of their country to exist free from foreign domination. In later years, Chinese nationalists and revolutionaries would look back on the Boxer Rebellion not only as a tragedy, but as a symbol of awakening. It marked the first time ordinary Chinese had risen in the name of their nation, however misguided their methods. In the villages where the Boxers once trained, old men would still tell stories of those days, of the rituals, the battles, and the dreams of driving out the foreigners. Mothers would hush their children with tales of the spirits that had once walked the earth to protect China. The Boxer Rebellion became legend, half myth, half history, but always a reminder of the dangers of pride and the cost of resistance. for the Western world. The rebellion was a lesson in the power of desperation. It showed how deeply a wounded people could strike when pushed to the edge. For China, it was both a wound and a spark. A wound that bled through the twilight of the Qing dynasty, but a spark that helped ignite the fires of revolution that would soon sweep away the old empire entirely. In 1911, just a decade after the Boxer Rebellion was crushed, the Qing dynasty collapsed. The last emperor was forced to abdicate, and the Republic of China was born. The dragon throne that had stood for 2,000 years was gone, and with it, the ancient world that the Boxers had tried, in their own way, to defend. Looking back, the Boxer Rebellion was a strange and tragic turning point. It was a clash of worlds, the old and the new, faith and science, isolation and globalization. The young men who had believed they could stop bullets with magic faced an enemy armed with modern rifles and artillery. Their courage was undeniable, but their time was over. Yet, perhaps the greatest irony was that the Boxers, in trying to save the old China, helped bring about the new one. Their failure exposed the weakness of the Qing government and the futility of resisting modernization through violence. In the decades that followed, new movements arose. Reformers, revolutionaries, thinkers who wanted to build a stronger, modern China. And somewhere, deep in the memory of the nation, the ghosts of the Boxers lingered, not as heroes or villains, but as symbols of a people's awakening after a century of humiliation. The ruins of that time still whisper stories. In the old districts of Beijing, where foreign embassies now stand and skyscrapers rise over ancient courtyards, there are places where the past seems to press through the surface, where, if you listen closely, you can almost hear the distant drums of the Boxers, beating in defiance against the coming storm. It is a sound of rage, of loss, end, but also of awakening. The heartbeat of a nation that refused to die, even as its world crumbled around it. The Boxer Rebellion, in the end, was not merely a war of fists against guns, but a desperate cry for dignity. It was the dying roar of an old empire facing the dawn of a new century. And though the Boxers themselves perished, their struggle became part of China's long, painful journey toward rebirth. A journey that would continue through revolution, war, and transformation until the Middle Kingdom found its voice again in the modern world.